The clash over the currency proved to be a serious setback for the Yes campaign. The post-referendum Ashcroft poll ranked this issue head and shoulders above all others among no voters. The independence vision won the hearts of the 45%, but not the heads of the 55%. And understandably so, because people needed to be reassured about their pensions and the money in their pockets. And this was just not credible, while Scotland was shackled to the Bank of England, a rocketing national debt, and a consistently escalating balance of payments. No, if Scotland was to reach its full economic potential, then that demanded an entirely fresh approach to financial management. But Mr. Salmon depended upon advice from his Council of Economic Advisers. Top bankers and academic economists, all of them respected oracles and creatures of the establishment. The advice he got was predictable. No problem, Alex. We can just share the pound. We're all quite comfortable with that, thank you. That effectively snuffed out any prospect of economic innovation or financial autonomy. And so the day was lost. More recently, the Greek government succumbed to the unelected Troika, which represented the German commercial banks. They just couldn't resist making lucrative loans to the Greek bank. These banks should have lost their shirts, just like any other commercial organisation making a bad judgment. It was not the Greek people to blame, but it was just another well-intentioned government, unable to deal with banks and bankers who habitually expect to be bailed out by the taxpayers they have just screwed. This has to stop. The good guys can win, but only by using the heat and preparing a sound strategy. Our MPs must open up to new ways of managing the financial system. It is crippling the real economy. But just a word or two about my own background before jumping into the deep end. I trained as an accountant in Glasgow many years ago and founded several companies in the manufacturing and construction industries, both in Glasgow and abroad. I was also a member of an early finance and taxation committee of the SNP, back in the days when the SNP was little more than a political curiosity. That was when I started my studies into the workings of the currency and banking system. The mysterious relationship between money and politics has intrigued me ever since. I concluded that no country could consider itself independent if all its people were permanently in debt. I do not refer here to private debt, which is our choice and personal responsibility, but to the national debt. Over my lifetime, I have witnessed the genuine economy overwhelmed by financial dogma and governments paralysed by the constraints of public debt. The national debt is the instrument of financial capitalism. When we accept the principle of national debt, we also accept that the state is accountable to the money system. That is a nonsense, because the national currency is issued by the state free of debt and guaranteed by all the people in it as the means of exchanging their goods and services. The privatisation of the money system is the ultimate white-collar crime and is manifest in the fractional reserve banking system, which is the source of financial capitalism. I believe there is no greater reason to fight for independence than to restore our money system to democratic accountability. This is how public investment has plummeted over the past 50 years, and yet the UK sinks deeper into debt by the day. The national debt is just another financial bogeyman, held by banks and institutions which know perfectly well that such bonds have no substance because they cannot nor will ever be repaid. This is the device which sucks £1 billion a week from the taxpayer in interest payments. It is the excuse for austerity and drives the entire neoliberal agenda. It is just another illusion conjured up by the banking system. And so we come to the heart of this financial confidence trick. Most people think the national currency is issued by the Treasury. Wrong. Apart from the 3 pence in the pound, which is the cash in our pockets, all money in circulation is created by our banks. Not everyone is familiar with this process, so please bear with me for a moment. There are 2 basic types of bank: fractional and full reserve. First left is a fractional reserve bank, where the share capital and reserves amount to 1/10 of outstanding loans. Now, second left, that means that if 10% of its loans default, then the bank goes bust and is insolvent. Full reserve is third from the left. If this bank loses the same 10% of its loans, then of course it takes a knock, but it remains sound. Up until 1986, all our building societies in the UK were full reserve institutions and financed 100% of our mortgages. Indeed, that represented 70% of all loans in Britain. Since the Thatcher deregulation, only credit unions remain as full reserve mutuals. So just how do banks create 97% of our money out of thin air? It's simple. New credit is created with every loan and overdraft. When a bank makes a loan, it writes the amount into its books as an asset, a sum the borrower owes to the bank. On the other side, it writes a liability, the risk that the loan may default. Some of this new money enters circulation legitimately as loans to customers, but much of it is used to purchase government bonds, which rack up the national debt. Even more is loaned to other banks to finance shadow banking and the financial markets, both of which drive the boom and bust cycles, which destabilise not only the financial system but the entire economy. Be assured, these are no accidental side effects. They are designed into the fractional reserve system to make fortunes for the few at the expense of the many. It is an institutionalised fraud upon the public, and putting it right should be top of the pops for any campaign for Scottish independence. And so to the matter in hand. Westminster is party to this fraud, and we have been conditioned into believing there is no alternative to government borrowing. Well, there certainly is. But don't expect the moneylenders to tell you about it. We also know that all governments, irrespective of their stripe, spend an inordinate amount of time anguishing over money matters, rather than getting on with what we know we can achieve. Westminster has never encouraged individualism or innovation, but Holyrood is very different. It is possible to introduce new ideas. The SNP is also very different, because ordinary party members can still influence policy at conference. Understandable banking is not rocket science, and when it ceases to be understandable, then someone is probably leading you up the garden path. So let's keep it simple and look at how small and medium-sized businesses manage their finances. No need to be an accountant to know the difference between income and expenditure and capital investment. Normal practice is to fund working capital from a bank overdraft. It is the legitimate purpose of bank credit, to bridge the gap between paying our bills and wages and receiving payment for our sales invoices. Short-term credit always has been, and should remain, the business of banks. But when it comes to capital investment in buildings, plant and machinery, then we need to look beyond the bank overdraft. This is a different kind of money, called equity. It is long-term money, representing something real, which, once you hand it over, then you go without the use of it until it is repaid. It is genuine investment, like saving in an old-fashioned building society. That was, of course, before these mutuals were bought over by the banks using their magic credit. We cannot expect financial stability if we fail to distinguish between ephemeral bank credit and genuine investment. Now, let's consider the financing of government. It too has what may be described as everyday running expenses, which have to be found from current taxation. But government also makes long-term public investment. New hospitals, schools, road and rail networks. There is a huge catalogue of public investment in the fabric and infrastructure of the nation. And that too should have nothing to do with bank credit. In a representative democracy, the people are sovereign. They own the equity of the nation. And when the Treasury first issues the national currency, every penny is also guaranteed by the people. It is the visible manifestation of nationhood, and that too has nothing to do with debt or commercial banks. To a banker, money exists only to make profit and more money. So when banks control the issue of the national currency, then it is made available solely for that purpose. To the rest of us, money is to facilitate the exchange of our goods and services, and thereby to create real wealth in the community. If that is true, then we must reform the present system. The national debt is based on Fox accounting, a figment created by moneylenders and without substance. It can no longer withstand rational examination, and no amount of privatizations, PFIs, austerity, interest rate rigging, inflation or deflation, or fiscal prudence will square this circle. We are born as shareholders in our nation, and when we print the currency, we print our share certificates, which we can freely exchange in the economic marketplace to create private and public wealth. In that process, we generate more revenues. To retain its value, money must be earned in exchange for useful and gainful employment and creative enterprise. Today, the banks churn out unlimited credit unrelated to any such worthwhile social or economic activity. What little genuine industry survives in the UK today does so in spite of the banking system, and certainly not because of it. Now, let me ask you to let that heresy stick to the wall for a moment whilst we remind ourselves why we are in a permanent state of financial crisis. Historically, the national currency always originated with the state, and the banks dealt only in commercial credit. In the 200 years between 1750 and 1950, the purchasing power of the pound declined only by a factor of 3. Today, our economy grows at best an average of 2% a year, but bank credit grows at 9%. This chart illustrates how the financial economy is awash with credit, whilst the real economy languishes because the state cannot afford to intervene with public investment. This is the social cost of privatising the money supply, and nothing will change for as long as the national currency remains interchangeable with virtually unlimited bank credit. This anomaly is not reconcilable and has defied all attempts to produce a rational monetary policy. This is the key issue, because we struggle with what is, in effect, a parallel currency, one unaccountable and issued by the private banks on behalf of their shareholders, and the other, a nominal 3%, issued by the state on behalf of the community. And yet this tiny proportion carries the entire burden of responsibility for the banking system. No, no, no. How on earth can this happen in a so-called democracy? Before the age of electronic credit, half of all money in circulation was cash. The state printed it and sent it to the banks for distribution. It was sovereign money issued by the people and for the people. It was their national currency. The state incurred no debt in doing this. When it was delivered to the banks in armoured vans and barrowed into the vaults, the government's account was credited, and it could then draw a cheque and spend the money into circulation on behalf of the community, a process known as seigniorage. Today, only 3 pence in every pound is cash. 97% of all money in circulation is now debt owed to some private bank. That's right. Whilst we were all mesmerised with the convenience of credit, we failed to notice that virtually all money had been replaced with bank credit, and the public carried the debt. Just try to imagine if we had retained sovereignty over our currency, and seigniorage had been updated to include electronic credit. Instead of delivering debt-free cash to our banks, it would have been the national credit, also free from debt, being credited to the government account. Instead of quantitative easing funding bailouts, obscure money markets and asset bubbles, the currency would again enter circulation as government investment. The national debt would have been capped and written off as bonds matured. The impact of that upon inflation, gainful full employment, modern infrastructure and prosperity would really transform our lives, rich and poor alike. Meantime, we participate in the money game according to rules written by the banker. He insists he behaves ethically and honestly. I don't think so. It is time to rewrite the rules of monopoly. Bankers accuse politicians of being irresponsible when it comes to managing the money system. That may be the pot calling the kettle black, but there is some truth in it. Senior politicians know perfectly well that they are being manipulated by lobbyists of vested interests, but are loath to disturb the establishment. They do, however, listen to public opinion, and if we can mobilise the independence movement to join this campaign, then Scotland could be on the verge of a second enlightenment, no less significant than that of Adam Smith all those years ago. Let's just recap on the national debt situation, because that's what drives the neoliberal agenda and all this austerity nonsense. The national debt is a relic of days gone by when money was gold, and the only way a state could get its hands on the stuff was by taxation or borrowing. When the gold standard was abandoned and everyone adopted fiat currencies, then the last vestige of logic for national debt evaporated. When we reject national debt, we reject financial feudalism, and we assert the right of every child to be born free of debt. And so we come to the campaign for a Scottish currency. The objective is to explain why the banking system works against the public interest, and to promote an alternative system as a key element of a written constitution for an independent Scotland. The strategy combines two initiatives. First, a think tank which presents practical and detailed proposals for consideration by government ministers, MSPs, petition and similar committees, and other interested organisations. Second, a peaceful pressure group to build public opinion towards a popular demand for significant changes to the banking and financial system in an independent Scotland which will benefit the community rather than a privileged elite. The think tank, the Centre for Scottish Constitutional Studies, already exists, as does Article 6 of the draft Constitution. In formal language, it describes a constitutional monetary authority having an independent status above government and similar to the judiciary in Scotland. The provisions are too many to describe here, but essentially return chartered banks in Scotland to be full reserve institutions administered and regulated by a central bank called the National Bank of Scotland. All cash and credit instruments, physical and electronic, will be originated by this central bank and disseminated by the commercial banks acting as intermediaries. In essence, a return to understandable banking. The detail is on the think tank website. For those who would like chapter and verse of the political and economic background to constitutional money and the technicalities of the transition from sterling to the Scottish pound, in fact, all the information that neither Mr. Cyprus or Mr. Salmond had at their fingertips when it was needed, then you can buy a copy of Moving On at the end of the meeting. Here is our invitation to Yes and SNP activists. We need a powerful group of enthusiasts who share our vision of a better and fairer financial system and who believe we must get this right before the next referendum. We can have the best ideas and policies in the world, but if no one knows about them, then they might as well not exist. A Scottish currency is a single, focused initiative, but it is the key to unlocking our potential as a nation. We would take this initiative to every independence campaigning group in the country. We need activists, organisers, banking and political insiders, media buffs who can produce a better video than this one. We also need physical and IT security specialists because we are confronting vested interests with unlimited resources. We should not underestimate a ruthless enemy, but if we can get this right, then everything else will follow. Fail, and we remain victims who can afford nothing. If you would like to help us, please leave your contact details on the form provided. Given an encouraging response, we will ask the organisers of this meeting to approve a local campaign group within your present branch, which will register with the campaign coordinator. Thank you for listening, and we will be happy to try and answer any questions you may have.